So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Tokyo's Haneda Airport, a new airport for me. I've been to Tokyo before, but flew in and out of Narita on that occasion. A couple of hours here, and then I'm getting on the 7th flight of my around the world odyssey designed to get One World Emerald status into the Finnair scheme in just one around the world ticket. I just got off flight number 6, which was a 14-hour marathon across from New York, so if I'm not my usual perky self, I'm sure you'll forgive me. But I'm continuing with Japan Airlines across to Seoul, and the temptation was to perhaps not film this and just try and get some sleep. But the distance of this flight's about 750 miles, which is about the same as the distance between London and Madrid. So I'm going to film it because it gives me another opportunity to show just how terrible European business class options are, particularly compared to what you get on a flight of a similar length within Asia. So I've got enough time to go and visit the lounge. There is a first class lounge here which I think I can get access to using my BA Gold status. Go and have a bit of a rest in there before taking the next flight. So if you'd like to see what happens, stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. Before we attempt to get into the lounge, I need to backtrack as the transfer process was quite interesting. Very light touch, you might say. A collective noun of ground agents were gathered at the exit of the jet bridge, and anyone connecting had their boarding passes examined and were directed up the escalators. I was braced for a long walk to a security checkpoint, but nope, at the top you were straight into the departure area. I thought this would mean there'd be security points at each gate, as there are in Singapore, but nope, Japan trusts the security protocols of the country you've arrived from, or at least they trust arrivals from the US. Quite a refreshing feeling actually to be trusted as a passenger. I recorded that intro and headed for the lounge and was very lucky that the JAL first class lounge was just around the corner. A collective noun of lounge guardians were waiting for me at the top of the escalators, and even though my boarding pass didn't show that I had access to this first class facility, the BA Emerald status I was able to show in the app did. The agent politely asked if I wanted to credit this flight to BA, but I politely declined, and I was in. It was all very pleasant, extremely polite, and incredibly civilised. I do like Japan. The lounge is really good. I veered to the left on entry as I'm British. We drive on the left, and that's the way we tend to veer. Lots of signs, but I liked the idea of a salon, so headed upstairs. Out of the lift, and there were a few spaces with unclear purposes, but I kept going and eventually found a large space that was almost completely uncontaminated with other passengers. The orangey seats looked the most comfy, so I headed over and made camp. A broad drinks offering was available to self-pour. No food options up here though. Baron de Rothschild Concordia Brut champagne, which sells online for about £55 a bottle, so I'd say it was reasonably premium. A very interesting range of mostly brown spirits too. I was seriously flagging at this point, and in my fog of fatigue I felt that some champagne would be the answer. Not sure it was, but it was very pleasant either way. A quick Google told me that this was only a small part of the lounge offering, so I headed back down and headed to the right beyond the reception area and found signs to the JAL table, which sounded more foodie. Still a long way to go past more spaces with unclear purposes, but I persisted and eventually I found the main dining space. And I have to report that this was probably the best smelling room I've ever walked into. It just smelt of absolute deliciousness. Multiple food options to the right, and it's a pretty massive space. More people here than upstairs, but it was still virtually deserted. That sign advertised a shoe shine service and another self-poured drinks station here. I kept going and found this charming space right at the end. My inbound flight had been delayed, meaning I only had perhaps 45 minutes of lounge time between flights, which was a tragedy, as this place looked, felt and smelt exceptional. You don't hear it discussed in the context of being the world's best lounge, and my stay was far too short for me to judge, but what I saw makes me really want to get back to it to do it proper justice. So I headed to the gate and was hanging around for a while as JAL started boarding a lot closer to the departure time than I expected. Japanese efficiency meant we were still all on board on time though. Group 2 boarding again for me, as I had my non-Emerald Finnair number on the boarding pass, but again it was no huge inconvenience as I boarded with the rest of the business cabin. The terminal is really high at Haneda, so it was a long way down to the plane, a 7-year-old Boeing 787-9 that had been with JAL since delivery. There's 3 layouts to this plane type, and this is the smallest business layout with 28 Sky Suite 3 seats based on the Safran Enquiries platform. One other version uses the excellent Apex suites that I really enjoyed on Oman Air, but this was still a lot of seat, particularly on a flight blocked to take 2 hours and 20 minutes. Seat 6A for me. A screen is ahead of you with a foot cubby underneath. This tapers to a point, so it looked like it would be a challenge on an overnight flight. Let me quickly flash a shot of the BA business cabin seat on a European flight of an equivalent duration. A surface to the left, slippers, headphones and a pillow were on my seat, the table and literature slots on the other side of you, seat controls over there too. It's a good looking seat, although my seat belt bafflement only deepened as this seat came with both a shoulder band and a lap airbag. I'm sure regular viewers will share my confusion, given that the last 4 flights I've reviewed all offered different restraint configurations on essentially the same seat. Beside you is a reading light, a remote for the IFE and a triangular shaped cupboard which limits what you can actually fit inside it. Plugs and sockets underneath. I was really flagging at this point. I was too tired to make notes by now, so as I don't have any footage of a pre-departure beverage, I'll conclude that there wasn't one. The design of the seatbelt meant that the airbag was going to blow my hip off rather than anything more valuable, and the shoulder strap felt literally like it was belt and braces. Japanese efficiency meant we pushed back just a couple of minutes late and the safety video played, the same one as I'd enjoyed on my previous A350 flight, so I was prepared this time and was able to get more footage of the more dramatic moments that most other airlines choose not to focus on. It's really interesting to see how this Japanese airline approaches this. Haneda is a relatively compact airport, so it was quickly our turn and we were up into a Tokyo night. I had the choice this trip of spending time in Tokyo or Seoul, and I'd picked Seoul mainly as next time I stick around in Japan I'd like to see a lot more of the country beyond Tokyo, and the time I had available to me this trip wouldn't have allowed that. An unusual tray configuration, but it worked, and its positioning would allow you to wriggle out if needed. And I took the opportunity to check out the flatbed before the crew got into their service groove. A smooth conversion, and the seat promises 6 foot 6 inches of length, and it just about delivers that, although the tapering of the foot cubby makes the effective length quite a few inches less. It all feels a bit cramped and the shoulder width isn't abundant, but I've laid in, or tried to lay in, a lot worse seats. Good clearance at the knee, which should make side sleeping possible. Reasonable privacy too, although overall this seat is a lot less impressive than the suite I experienced on JAL's A350. Service started with the traditional Japanese microwaved rag. Here's the menu, presented in Japanese, Korean and English. Only one food option though. This was September, so it was sushi. Remember, this is a 2-hour flight, but I was a little surprised that there was no choice. Special meals were obviously available if ordered in advance, but once aboard it was sushi or no noshi. I also thought the drinks options were quite narrow, only Chivas Regal and 2 sakis in the spirits offering, which surprised me. So I had to have the sushi plate, which wasn't an issue at all as I was all in for the Japanese immersion, and it was very good, accompanied by some red wine. Then a tub of Haagen-Dazs for dessert, so the Japanese immersion was limited to the main course only. After the meal I couldn't get the IFE system to work, but that wasn't really a problem as I spent most of the flight researching what I was going to do to continue my trip. When I stepped off the last flight, I found emails from Cathay Pacific saying they'd cancelled my onward 2 flights as I was due to transit Hong Kong on the exact day Cyclone Ragasa was expected to pass overhead. JAL had given me 24 hours of free Wi-Fi on my flight in from New York, so as this 787 also offered Wi-Fi, I was able to connect and research options whilst chatting online with Propeller Travel to come up with a plan. I'll not bog this review down with a lengthy discourse on what happened, but let's say it was quite sticky for a while, and it showed me how wise I had been to book a trip of this complexity through an agency like Propeller that really knows what it's doing. A 787, so it had the usual electric windows, but as this was an evening flight, the crew didn't mess with them. And after less than 2 hours aloft, we descended into Seoul's Gimpo Airport, the older Seoul airport that's quite a lot closer to the city centre and these days is used exclusively for shorter regional flights. The flight was a real curate's egg. Compared to virtually all European flights of a similar length, this flight was amazing. You get a great seat, great food and excellent service. But compared to the experience JAL offers on its longer flights, it really wasn't that great. The A350 I'd just gotten off made this seat and food seem really quite poor. But all things should be relative and neither of those comparisons are really fair. So if I compare this experience to other intra-Asian flights of a similar length I've taken, JAL was good, but it did fall a little short of the standards set by airlines like Singapore and Cathay in the region. Not a reason to avoid JAL by any means, but there's some work for them to do to bring themselves up to the standards of the very best airlines in the region. And despite my fatigue and a pervasive level of stress about how I was going to get back out of Korea, I really enjoyed this flight. A bus gate, which always feels like an annoyance at first, but it does mean you get dropped right by the immigration desks, which worked for me that night as I was very ready for bed. I'd completed a short landing card on the plane and was quickly through immigration and off to spend a very pleasant day in Seoul before heading home. Not that I knew how I was going to get home when I left the airport. This one-way flight can be purchased for about £600, but spreading the total cost of this round-the-world ticket based on each leg's distance, it notionally cost me £113, which obviously was great value. So thanks for watching, like, comment and subscribe if you're new, especially if you want to find out how I did eventually make it home. And if you'd like to support what I do here more directly, there's a Patreon account linked below. So thanks for watching and good night.